Metaphor Refantazio has been on my watch list for quite some time. When it was first announced, I was intrigued that Atlus were really going for a more classic, medieval dark fantasy type RPG, instead of relying on yet another Persona or SMT to carry them forward. In this video, we'll discuss the world building and narrative focus, combat and level design, and future sequel considerations, as well as my closing comments. Time marches on, and the age of a new king draws near. One of the things that Metaphor absolutely excels in is using its story to draw players in and build the world and its characters through a gripping narrative that starts and continues to build with a slow burn that allows the player to really become immersed in the United Kingdom of Euchronia. There are 8 tribes and the world is full of racism, inequality, and injustice. We are immediately greeted by images of corruption and greed while a sleeping king lies in bed, and a young man visits him with dreams of a utopia, of unity and peace before slaughtering him in cold blood and being delighted in doing so. In just the first 5 minutes, the player is thrust into a world of turmoil, and the politicians of the world are gathered in shock that the king has been assassinated in his own bed, leaving them wondering if their own safety is at risk. Civil war and unrest hang in the balance, and the fate of the world magic with it. Luis, the killer we now know, but the others do not know of his transgressions. We also come to find that the prince is also out of the picture. His goal is to obtain the kingdom and the royal scepter, and so the stage has been set. What happens next is one hell of a roller coaster ride. The king's death making its rounds, the story then shifts to our protagonist, who we knew so little about, who is riding in a caravan and hearing the kingdom has become unsafe and there are monsters abound. Luis also has a bit of a cult following already, as we are attacked by some of his bandit supporters. This social injustice is immediately apparent as you are a victim of outright racism for being an Elda in an attempt to steal your precious book whilst being saved by a mysterious red-haired elf-like woman. There's also an important message in the dialogue between you and Gallica. Anxiety breeds the world's cruelest monsters. Also, regarding anxiety, the kingdom of Euchronia, which is set among 3 continents and among its 8 tribes, deals with its own bout of anxiety as the security of a unified kingdom is now gone, and with it now allows us to paint the world anew with the power of fantasy. All is not well in the grand capital either. The first image you see is a Parapus being hung to death for using a niter improperly. The people cheer this on as if to celebrate such brutality as to make an example of anyone who dares step out of line. The townsfolk also help build this immersion by muttering about the king being assassinated, and since Luis has left his former military role, the army has lost its reputation, leading to resentment among the citizens. We also come to find that the prince is in fact not dead, but rather comatose under a spell for over 10 years, and no one seems to know how long he has left to live. Goals set aside now, we get some background on magic's impact to the world, and how powerful the royal scepter is, and should it get in the wrong hands, well, you know how that tends to end. The story then introduces us to a nobleman from a kingdom decimated from a prior war, and he seems to have an axe to grind, though rightfully so. As you've taken a liking to this Clamar and enlisted yourself for the service, you get a little more context into the book that you've been carrying to this point. This book contains a story of a fantasy and a utopia with no prejudice or inequalities in its society, unlike the one at present. This world looks much like our own. Fascinating, really. We are then presented a flashback with the protagonist and the prince who seem to share the same ideals of what a kingdom should look like, much akin to the book that he has been reading, which we now hold. The prince's affliction still affects them. We are there to support them no matter what and help usher in this era of peace we are both aligned with. The way this game builds each story transition is wonderfully illustrated, as if you're being read a chapter from a fairy tale, as you get a brief introduction on the area you're going to, allowing the player to fully focus on the narrative as it unfolds. In this following area, the protagonist, now a part of the army, has the northern bridge fort to help stave off monsters from entering the royal capital. In another example of narrative building, we are hinted to the significance of the book the protagonist possesses, and how our choices influence what the other characters feel in regards to this. Having a world without Magla, and thus a utopia, intrigues the nobleman who has taken a liking to us earlier. The now dead king, who is also an idealist himself, and again, hints at something much larger than what we are privy to. After saving the loudmouth nobleman from certain disciplinary action, we come to find out he is the son of the Count of Halia, the young Stroll. I already liked his demeanor and he seems like he will be a loyal ally. Now, back to the story, which wastes little time showing why we are brought to the fort, as we are greeted by a sea of brutality of murdered soldiers and a new enemy type referred to as a human, and one that looks grotesque at that. Searching for survivors ends as a fruitless task, and this area provides more of the introductory for the dungeon exploration and battle mechanics, but I'll talk a little bit more on that later. Atop the apex of the fort, our true battle begins against the home of Orleo, completely overmatched and underprepared. As Stroll falls, something within us awakens, we are transported to a sanctuary filled with light, and we are told that we are destined for the throne, and we must choose to either die now or confront the threat before us. As we accept who we are before this entity, the awakening of the hero's inner power is both graphic and visceral, and lends itself to something akin to what you may have already seen if you played a previous Persona game before. With the newfound seeker power, and a greater understanding of the mechanics of the game, we both save Stroll and met the contact Grius. As we are now with Grius, the mission is clear: avenge the king and kill Luis Guiabern. Given further context into just who Luis is, he is both a military mastermind and a powerful mage. It is suspected that Luis is responsible for both the prince and the king's death. Without him leading the military, things are expected to be worse than before, and in light of all this, we now have Stroll on board for the mission, who has reasons of his own. Little is known about the humans or their origins, but their destructive power is unmatched, and their potential to ruin civilization as we know it is something to be dealt with in time. As the story shifts towards our next objective, we're transported to an unknown location with a strange man who can reach out to us via the book that we have. Moore, as he's called, is the author, and this place is called Academia. He has no idea why he's there, or where his study used to be, or if it's even his kingdom. And so, you form an allegiance with Moore to help yourself learn of archetypes, and to find out more about his past and who he really is. Now, shifting back to the path towards the Grand Trad, the Nord Mines gives us further context on what kind of Captain Klingler was, and just how cowardly he is as he uses his soldiers as fodder to bait the human we just killed. Klingler views Luis as a savior and is too much of a coward to fight a human like a real leader would. Also, an interesting bit of narrative is given to us that Klingler was one of the commanders who, 7 years ago, was there in a village called Halia as it was burned to the ground and left but one survivor, Stroll. This confrontation and realization with Klingler forces an awakening within Stroll, and he chooses his path. His vengeance for his lost homeland manifests with his archetype, an archetype made to pass judgment on an oppressor like that of Klingler. This battle really set up another tutorial of sorts of how to battle multiple enemy types, which is great for a newer player, and business as usual to a veteran Atlus player. What continues to draw you into the narrative is how Luis is orchestrating all of this behind the shadows as more and more comes to light. Stroll is also fully aligned and has personal interest in stopping Luis since he played a part in the destruction of Halia. Grius is also granted an awakening himself, but to a much lesser degree. With only 5 days of the king's funeral, time is of the essence. As you get through the mines, we learn about Stroll's past, how his village was burned to the ground by a human, and how his parents' action had an effect on him, as they are more heroic than he ever imagined. Even as his town asked for aid, they are ignored and left to die. Finally, we are given context to what happened to the young prince and a cutscene with a brutal assassination attempt with some mass attackers, as Grius and the young knight look vaguely familiar to who we saw in our intro, warding off their attempts. Though they were unsuccessful, the prince was cursed with a spell, slowly leeching life from him, and it is presumed that Luis is behind it. The motivations are clear now with Grius and Stroll, as they both have skin in the game from Luis's actions and must be dealt with. As we transition to a now familiar face, she laments how long she has been away from the capital, and the need for a search party will not be needed much longer. But what sort of impact will this night have on our story? As the day draws to a close, the path to a new king draws closer. One thing to note is the budding relationships you continue to build and cultivate as the story advances, as you meet Maria and Fabienne, who serve as a moral support, if you will, to Grius, Stroll, and the protagonist. You even share more details of your book with Maria, who is enthralled with this utopia that exists within in an equal society where the rich and poor can get along in harmony, a novel idea. And so, as our journey draws forward and the plot thickens, as the scheme to assassinate Luis comes to a head. If you needed any further reasoning for hating Luis at this moment, his entrance to the ceremony is one of grandeur and rubs in the face of those in power as he seeks to the throne in a show of power and elegance. But something more sinister is shown as he scoffs at the ruling class of the kingdom and reveals something eviler than we could ever have imagined. A dead human is shown to the masses and a sense of panic ensues. This event causes a sort of trigger within you, and unexpectedly, King long thought dead has used his magic to manifest himself as a moon-like entity. Athlodius has decreed that a tournament will take place, and on the day of the hero, if this hero has won the faith of the citizens, they will take the throne and rule over Euchronia. Each person is capable of undertaking this task, and social class or race doesn't matter. Even with Luis having been accused of killing the king in front of everyone at the capital, he uses this to his advantage and gleefully admits that it was his doing and retribution was needed. With Grius having attempted to assassinate Luis, and unexpectedly the king's magic saving him from certain death, Grius is killed savagely and used as a prop to further push Luis's agenda and successfully sway the masses in his favor in a show of power and brutality. We are also introduced to one of Luis's henchmen who seeks the same agenda and is a powerful necromancer, and in a show of power, desecrates the king's casket and raises the dead to buy himself time to gather magla for his own means. We also get introduced to the royal knight Hulkenberg, who was quite close to Grius before his death. As our interests align, we scale the tower to battle the necromancer. During the journey, we also learn that Grius, otherwise known as Alsis, was the prince's tutor and taught him swordsmanship. Hulkenberg has no other like-minded people on her side, so it's only natural to join our crusade against Luis and his henchmen. The Catacombs provide an important narrative point with Hulkenberg awakening and facing the failures of her past against an undead Grius, serving as a haunting reminder. Much like other tutorial parts prior, her awakening introduces a synergy system and utilizing guard and battle with her knight archetype. Alsis dying wishes us to protect Maria in the kingdom, a sad and fitting end to a character I wish that we could have known more about. A sense of urgency is also given to the player, showing the state of the prince as he is being gripped by the curse set upon him. Another interesting aspect of the hunt for the necromancer Zorba is the murals of Luis and his reverence towards him as a sort of god to be worshipped, whilst desecrating portraits of the old kings. The man is a true zealot. Zorba, upon reading, alludes to being the orchestrator of the melancholia crystals, to which are formed of natural phenomena, and has the power to drive anyone or anything mad. Even though Zorba had plans to use the royal scepter, his plan was not to be, as the king determined him to be unworthy to wield it, and, should he win favor, then he may earn it. But that, however, is not his goal, rather to bring upon Luis's destined kingdom to bring salvation to the people. Rather demented, but we have come to expect no less from him at this point. Zorba's battle itself was more to teach you how to build your press turns against his summon's weaknesses, and though he is neutral to physical attacks, he isn't resistant to light. The battle itself felt pretty high stakes given the ramifications of what would happen next. Zorba also seems to have lived a life of prejudice and felt the injustices of Euchronia, and knows as an Elda, the protagonist, has felt the same. As he sacrifices himself, he brings about the day of calamity, a reanimation of the dead human from earlier, the Homo Avedis. Another well-done boss battle here with the concept of attacking the shell first, then the heart and hand, and making use of Gallica to help buy time. It can also generate more turns and multi-attack. It was set up perfectly to help prepare the player for what types of challenges may lie ahead. Grius, at least, in our hearts, would be proud of the progress that we have made, and our attention now turns to the politics going on behind the scenes, as the Senate schemes to try and undermine the will of the king and his magic while seeking the help of the Cursebreaker Rella. We are alluded to a loophole in the king's magic that a duel can circumvent it, and one cannot be outright murdered. You might say that the king expected all this ahead of time somehow. The church will no doubt continue to look for ways to get ahead of Luis, and we are not on their radar just yet. The story then shifts to the exhibition of the brave, where you're required to slay a monster to show your might to the people of Euchronia. And aside from this quest, the notion that Grius was studying the curse on the prince and operating under the assumption that Luis had played a hand in it, and he must know a way to break the curse, and we may not need to kill him. The church is also now sponsoring a tournament for the throne, and this will serve as a way to get closer to Luis and also gain favor with the people. We also accept a bounty from Barden to hunt the child kidnapper Heisme, who also has quite the devious reputation, surely leading us on a dark path to rid the world of this unsavory being. On top of this, Hulkenberg has now quit the Knight's Order and is fully on board with finding Heisme and helping us on our mission against Luis, which is smart on her part, as she would have been found out quickly had she not. As our journey proceeds, we share tales from our book with our compatriots who seem overjoyed to find out about this other world and how it'd be fantastic to have it in Euchronia. Not only that, we are introduced to another intriguing character, Juna the Songstress, who is incredibly influential and loved by all. This is just the opening to the tournament, and yet we are given a path ahead by the Crier to go to Port Breilhaven, Altabury, and the Grand Trad. This segment also introduces us to some of our competition, like Stanifex Forden, Godot, and Glottal, and Loveless, just to name a few. Hulkenberg went to great lengths to obtain her Gauntlet Runner, as we are shown, as she deals with the eccentric Nereus, who is also shown to be quite brilliant. As we're using this tournament to get to Luis, it makes sense to help one of his henchmen against Church as we save Glottal from certain defeat. This then grants us an audience with Luis and Juna, to which we pledge our allegiance to him and join his ranks. As the page turns in our story, we arrive at the old town of Martyra. We then meet with Bardin and learn about the human menace that plagues the town and more about the kidnapper Haisme. Joanna, the sanctress for the town, also gives us more detail on these kidnappings as the town struggles, but she also pledges her support if we are able to dispose of Haisme. Now, what seems like it should be a straightforward mission takes a turn for the unexpected as we end up in a human sandworm's gut. Not only that, but you are quite literally shit out by the worm as your escape route and very conveniently ending up at the cave where Haisme is alleged to be. Now, for me, the introduction to Haisme was awesome since you're led to believe he's something other than what he is, and turns out to be that he's a very noble knight, and he speaks quite well, but he doesn't appear to be the monster that he's painted out to be. But not before a short gimmicky battle with him. He then escapes, and the party finding out about his background with his dead child and being disgraced from his own village. You really feel that he has been through way more than a knight should ever have to deal with. In a bit of comedic gold, you bring Haisme out of hiding by bringing pots and pans and yelling and insulting him. As we come to the realization that he is in fact not the kidnapper and there are some bigger things and more sinister things at play, he agrees to join us and go back to Martyra to petition his innocence. The real twist of this section comes from Bardin and Haisme working together to find out that Lady Joanna has been working with Moore to kidnap children and feed them to her human monster child. Haisme, who also has his own awakening spurred by these events of his past and what is currently transpiring in Brigante Castle, and the atrocities are being done in his name. To this point, we have seen some rather grotesque designs of the humans, but Joanna's child, the Homo Jazulo, the boss provided an interesting challenge by forcing the player to target its eyes to blind it, then utilizing its weaknesses to pierce, and being able to withstand its status ailments using sulfur assaults and synthesis skills when able to deal heavy damage. A distraught mother in the mourning at the loss of her inhuman child was particularly heart-wrenching as she cared deeply for her child, and losing all that she had left in her grief causes Haisme to share more detail about his past as well, with his own son's death and how hard it was for him to cope with the loss, and in being able to really get past it, force himself into exile. One could really hardly blame him under these circumstances. But in finding the protagonist in his team, Haisme found purpose and a reason to go on, and knowing that his son would never want him to live like this. Now, I think any mother in Johanna's place would also have been willing to die in order for her child to live. I know I would do the same for my own child. I love this dark and visceral and personal storytelling that they went through for this part of the story, as it really helps drive the narrative wonderfully. Joanna also volunteers herself to the church as the monster of Martyra and pledges her support while handing off the governing duties to Bardin. With everything now tied up here, we make our way to Port Breilhaven in the Land of Duty in the capital of Oceania. But is it a place where we'll receive acclaim or something far worse? Actually, seeing Breilhaven for the first time fills you with a sense of amazement, as the town is bright and bustling and vibrant, and the party is in awe of its beauty. What at first seems to be a rather innocuous place, with each candidate campaigning for themselves and their supporters, and an introduction to Saint Rella, who is Juna's sister interestingly enough, and adding another layer to the plot. While each competitor showed their spoils, each greater than the last, we then steal the show by bringing out Joanna and having her admit to her transgressions, and she pays the ultimate price with a swift death for all the sins that she committed in Martyra, and clears Haisme's name before her own beheading. It was all worth it, however, as we successfully get the attention of Luis, and he is convinced of our abilities to also help him in his agenda. The church is also scheming behind the scenes to help make the next test a difficult one in obtaining an ancient relic in hopes of something to break the king's magic. The royal scepter has yet to be found, and no one knows where it is at this point. Breilhaven also brings more characters into the fold, like Luis's henchmen, Basilio and Fidelio, two characters that have had a rough life and have sought purpose that Luis provides them. Oh, and naturally they aren't keen to us as outsiders either, but this allows us to finally get closer to Luis and gain entry to his Skyrunner, Geradrius. Narratively, this has been your typical Atlus-style slow burn, but there is an unmistakable tension within the Geradrius as you are the new recruits and no one is ready to trust you yet. This segment also really brings out just who Luis is and how cunning he is, while also allowing us to join the ranks, as he cares so little for Forden and killing him would bring him great pleasure. Though we now have this allegiance, and it is a shaky one at best, there are bigger things at play. During the soiree, held by Luis, you pledge loyalty to him and sneak aboard the Geradrius to sneak a look at these books to find information on the curse we presume to be put on the prince. The search to get to this point was admittedly not a shining point for this game, as I felt the prior pacing to this point was right on track, and this forcibly slowed it down for the sake of padding in this section. On a more positive note, this section also provided more context into Luis's motives and Stroll's history with him. You see, Luis used Stroll's village as an example, and allowed the human to destroy and further his agenda, as he cared little for the lives of the people of Halia. Halia also burned so the church would have to pay attention and show the others that being the strongest to survive in this world is truly the path forward. Bringing our attention back to the protagonist, we learn that Luis also has a book similar to our own, and this sparks more questions and answers. Then, an interesting conundrum happens. Juna, hearing of Gallica, comes to our aid, and in getting captured by Glottal, causes her to awaken herself. And it also shows that in duels, the king's magic won't take effect. The boss battle itself, there wasn't much to it other than focusing on Hector first and taking out Glottal with pure force. This defeat serves as more of a bridge to the next part of the story, where things really begin to jump off. Naturally, your ascent in the death of Glottal has brought skepticism by Fidelio and Basilio, but in defeating him, you have gained further trust with Luis and allowing Juna to have you as her escort. Also regarding Juna, she reveals herself to the party that she is a special agent that was working with Grius, and her role was to get the curse formula while Grius killed Luis. Juna also views this operation as an inspiration for her art, and she is strong in her convictions. Truly an intriguing character with a powerful archetype. We also now personally meet Rella, who attempts to help us decipher this formula. Further adding another layer to the narrative is finding out Rella's family adopted Juna, and they are sisters in both of higher social standing within the society. Through conversation with Rella, we come to find out that this curse draws on the magic of the user, and as long as Luis lives, this curse will persist. The book is also of no help to us, as it's only an outline and not instructions on how to break it. So, we're at an impasse. While we await orders from Luis and from the church on our next steps, much as we have done with incorporating new members into the fold is to show them the utopia of our book. This serves as another way to align them with our beliefs, as a world without prejudice and inequality isn't exactly a hard sell. Our next challenge has now been set. We are to obtain some divine relics as part of the tournament, and also as part of this, sealing the pagans' relics, which is effectively removing them as part of the land's history, a truly despicable act on behalf of the church. Luis has his own plans for Forden, but for us, we must go to a faraway land and get something called the Dracodius. We hear from the Mostari candidate about the importance of the relics to his culture and the devastation the ransacking of the church would cause to his culture. Juna has also been a victim of oppression herself and finds common ground with the Mostari. As we are told to reconsider, the Gauntlet Runner is outfitted to work on the seas now, and we now have Fidelio and Basilio tagging along to keep tabs on us, so not do anything funny with the relic on the behest of Luis. Our journey with our new friends takes us to Virga Island, the homeland of the Mostari and rumored spot of the Dracodius. But you didn't possibly think the journey would be without trouble, did you? Edging closer to the island, we are attacked by a seafaring human, the Homo Sabara. I personally really enjoyed this battle as you took down his tentacles and then used fire and electric-based attacks to hasten its demise in a really lovely battle that also sets the tone for the next arc of the story with Virga Island. This unforeseen bit of adversity has brought us all a little closer and shown a softer side to Fidelio and Basilio too, alluding to a potential wrinkle and crack in the armor of Luis' strongest soldiers. The island itself seems pure and untouched by the industry of the mainland, an important note from the scene before, predictably captured with a strange three-eyed woman able to communicate telepathically with the protagonist, who interprets him as a messenger of the dragon gods. During our trial, we were to be sacrificed to the dragon god for our transgressions, and in times of strife, this typically helps fix things for the Mostari. But it was not to be, as the young priestess Yufa had a moment of clarity in the springs, and has come to the understanding that she herself is a sacrifice. Not only that, but we get saved by Fidelio and Basilio in order to help them get the lance at the Dragon Temple. But this journey is not so simple. Edeni is found incapacitated, and while we could have just left him to die, it's agreed to help him to be cared for at the village, and he in turn decides to help us since we saved his life. Once we do some tasks at his behest, we finally get to the Dragon Temple where things really get turned sideways from what you were led to believe narratively speaking. In addition to a dramatic step up difficulty-wise, and with Fidelio and Basilio out of the picture for the time being, the Dragon Temple exposes us to some remarkable moments involving the past history of the Mostari with the worship of multiple gods, the world after the ruins, and finally meeting Yufa, who falsely believes the island is the cause of the Magla creating all this chaos. Given it's across all the nations, this just isn't true. With her having agreed to join the party and to help fix the situation and find the lance, things are becoming even crazier. Going deeper into the temple, another mural shows the origins of the Mostari passed down generation to generation, as well as the birth of the priestess. Just when you think you would keep going into another mural, you open a strange door and come to discover clear blue skies underground in a place called Drakengrace Shinjuku, where the lost city of a civilization from long ago. The Mustari had found the city and the lands and built a temple over it as a monument to the past. To be frank, this reveal was well done in the sense that in JRPGs, this trope of finding old civilizations of the past has been well utilized at this point, but to Atlus's credit, they hit it well enough within the narrative that it wasn't so overwhelmingly obvious to be lame. This particular dungeon also did help break up some of the sameness from some of the side quests to help feel unique as you traversed it. You also talk Yufa out of sacrificing yourself to the dragon god Et and help her on a new path to help both herself and her people. She seemed to be in denial that a priestess could be a fighter instead of a willing sacrifice. Yufa's parents also sought to question these sacrifices, and it ended up costing them their lives as a result. She is also let in on her plot against Luis and Dracodius' importance against his tyrant, something she wholeheartedly aligns with and is a pure soul. Our greatest challenge lies ahead, dragon god Et. We also come to find it's been blighted with Megalo and has a human attached to it, which is a pretty ridiculous concept. Hulkenberg also provides the moral push to spur Yufa's awakening to save her friends and her people from a god who has been possessed by melancholia. The Homo Margo attached to Et is weak to wind-based attacks and allowed you to build your press turns against it to use Yufa's synergy-based attacks to hit both human and dragon. Once the human has been disposed of, you can focus on the dragon solely with your best attacks to wipe it out. After defeating the dragon god, it then goes into its vessel, the Dracodius, in its true form. Dragons are also pure manifestations of Megalo within the world of Euchronia. We also come to learn that Mustari priests were also the fighters of their people and not submissive as we are led to believe. Had she gone on her original path, the true knowledge would have been lost upon herself and her people. Oh, but you didn't possibly think they would let us off the hook that easy, did you? This battle is actually two-tier, and you again have to battle the human, who can change his weaknesses and remove status effects, while also dealing some heavy dark damage to the party. With that satisfying final defeat, Yufa has fulfilled her destiny to her people and herself, and the true fate of the old world, which delegitimizes the faith of the Sanctus Church. Yufa also comes to understand that her fate is beyond the island's border, and she wants to learn about the world and its cultures while helping us in our mission. Cracks also begin to show in Basilio's tough exterior, as you can tell things are going to change with him before too long. Now, with the power to destroy Luis, our plan has shifted to trick him with a fake, something Neris can help us with on Saint's Day. Also, much like when obtaining new allies, we show them the utopia of our book, and it speaks to Yufa and that the people of the world believe in free will and support multiple gods. These people also chose to face their anxieties instead of running from it. Another important bit of history within the characters is also revealed, as Rella, who had been asked to help cure Fidelio of his ailments, have a bit of history between them, and actually helped them when they were younger and in a tough spot. It's interesting that they found a way narratively to loop them in, helping Juna as bodyguards initially, to having a history with her sister Rella unknown to her at the time. Rella is also on our side against Luis, but can't outright help us in our defense understandably, but wishes us well. As we've been accustomed to, Fidelio has now taken an interest in our book and is fascinated by the world within it, but not totally sold by his natural skepticism, and Basilio is rather taken by it, and if they were to live in such a place, they could have a diner together. Taking off the good vibes brought by these two, we share a lighthearted moment before the shit inevitably hits the fan. The Mustari have a festival while Yufa and Hulkenberg partake in the Dragon Tears, which they start then tripping out, giving us some much needed comedy in times of darkness. The moment we share with Juna really highlights that Atlus also wanted to include romance in this game, but ultimately didn't, and probably for the better. The wedge is also being driven deeper with Fidelio and Basilio, and there will be no doubt a turning point in their relationship to him, as they have been shown a better path, but when that action will be taken by them, only time will tell. As the story then transitions to Altabury, the seat of sanctism, the feeling of dread begins to flow over you. The dark skies present a sense of foreboding for what is to come. Luis is rightfully pleased. We've completed the task for the lance, and we're also expected to drop from the competition and pledge our support to him. Yufa, unfamiliar with Luis, also feels that he's crossed the bridge too far, and begin to plot his assassination during the opera. It's risks that we have to take, and we'll be exposed as fakes and killed if we do not succeed. It'll take a team effort to make this work, and failure is not an option. Remember the build-up that I mentioned earlier with Fidelio and Basilio? Those moral cracks in the armor, so to speak, are finally being torn apart, and they are now both questioning Luis's agenda if it's something that they truly want, and they seem to really value equity and freedom more than having to be the strongest to survive, even if it does directly benefit them. Before we move on to the next big arc in the story, I want to take a moment to illustrate that to this point, the world has been built up with these characters and nations wonderfully, and it has really felt like a living, breathing world with a lot of moral ambiguity within. Credit to Atlus for developing it this way. Now, back to our story. The opera assassination now in motion with Luis brooding over Forden, the time is now ripe to strike our adversary. Sadly, our attempt was met with mixed results, and it appears that Luis was struck, but we were unable to retrieve the lance. As you might expect, Luis would not die so easily and sees us for what we are, and the ensuing battle puts everything on the line. The Master Offno in this battle was not one for the weak. Luis has the ability to lower your attack and defense, and also gain more turns, and his rail slash is devastating. After a long-fought battle, and with Luis's death, we improvise to claim that the lance is a gift for Forden, and come clean to the people about our plot against Luis. Also finally confronted by the Magnus brothers, we come clean to them as well about the prince and our plan against Luis and why it was necessary. The truth of our actions causes them to stop their pursuit in hopes of some self-reflection, and while the curse has not yet been lifted, Forden is then presumed to be the culprit. Another twist I found to be enjoyable was that Luis was in fact not dead, not that it was unexpected by any means, but he was smart enough to swap out the lances with a fake and use the king's magic against Forden so that he would be killed. Truly cunning work, Luis. Not only did his plan of playing the long game work to kill Forden, but he never actually died and got Zorwit to heal his flesh wound in an act of theater for everyone else. Luis knew of our plan the entire time and let it play out step by step, and he was ready to counter anything that we had done. He didn't even care if we had died, since we would have felt that his power wouldn't have been befit to a crown, but all went to plan and we are nothing but trouble. Luis, now drunk in his own power, tries to murder some Sanctus, but when we try to save them, Fidelio and Basilio shield them and prove to Luis that his actions are wrong and evil. This come to Jesus moment was really special growth for these two, as they had led a hard life of poverty and adversity and prejudice. To have inspired them to make the ultimate sacrifice is the best kind of character growth you'd like to see, and Fidelio in his brutal death saw the light and ultimately pushes his brother to be better than him. His awakening proved that to himself as well as Fidelio's spirit, not sure how he was able to see that, wishes him well, and knowing that his self and the Sanctus appreciation for him understood that maybe the world is not such a cruel place after all. The plot thickens even deeper as the Senate elevate Rella to be the new participant in the quest for the throne, and while reluctant to accept, she finds that she is quickly accepted and rises up the ranks quickly as Forden did, but not without some Luis meddling taking place, of course. The man was successfully able to convince the king to remove his magic and turn the tides to something more favorable to him, like using his strength and survival of the fittest type tournament, a masterful gambit. As now desperate times call for desperate measures, we reveal ourselves to be the prince in an effort to sway the public opinion in our favor. If it pays off long term or not, we cannot yet know. Another twist that is then presented is Godot attempts to battle Rella for her place within the church, but he is rendered powerless, and an important wrinkle is then laid out for us with a cursed thorns being used by Rella to stop his advance. She also does a little mind control to further influence her public opinion, to ascend the ranks and push her own dogmatic vision of no worries or anxiety, but also taking away their own free will in exchange. Hardly a compromise worth taking. While Luis believes that there is no God, Rella believes that since the church has abused the people's will for so long, that her way, in taking away people's anxieties, that her way could not possibly be any worse, and no one should have to die should they choose to go along with it. Rella also admits that she was the one to cast the curse, and Hulkenberg was the one who attacked her that evening. She did all this while she was only 12 years old too. The amount of trauma, no doubt, has plagued her for years and set up Luis to be the scapegoat masterfully. The only way for us to get the scepter is to face her at the former Mages Academy, in a place that Rella and Juna know quite well for unfortunate reasons. The time has come upon us where the narrative has shifted away from the competition and has become more of a personal journey for each of the members and even our adversaries. Juna can't believe her sister could even be a part of a conspiracy, let alone the one to cast a spell, but she's ready to do what it takes to come out on top. An unimaginable thought for most to be forced to kill one's own sibling. What makes this confrontation so hurtful is that her own sister basically disowns her in front of her friends and quips about her being an acquisition for the House Cygnus, treating her like she's not even a person. Though she also doubts our ability to lead, the only way to settle this is in battle. The significance of this battle is twofold. It stakes your legitimacy to the throne, and proof that you're strong enough to take out Luis, and it has personal stakes for Juna, in uncovering more about her past that she wasn't ever aware of. What I enjoyed from this battle was that it first fooled you with a sense of security. Dropping heavy fire-based attacks on the ice dragon Sogne would lead to an easy battle, which was true for the first phase, but then she gives her magic to the dragon, and on the second phase, which also has the ability to raise its attack, it also hits you with status effects and has multi-hit physical and ice-based attacks, which can be devastating. Only once we defeat her do we find out what truly happened on the night of the prince's assassination. Only 12, someone so young and naive to the world, The church saw her as someone easily exploitable, all this stemming from Forden not accepting that the king had an elder child, and through his bigotry, influenced young Rella and her family's devotion to the church to get her to do the deed, to place the blame on Luis in a 2-for-1 deal, which would also allow Forden to ascend to power. Forden, ever the manipulator, also uses Juna as a piece against Rella to get her to comply, since Rella viewed Juna as her freedom and someone that she aspires to be like, even giving her the will to live. Rella is a truly nuanced character, and one that you can say throughout some somewhat malicious compliance went on a darker path than we might have expected, but one that is truly regretful for what she has done. She also tells us of some ominous information regarding Luis and how her visions seen of him are violent, brutal, and nihilistic. All of this was a test by Rella to see if we could indeed handle the challenge of taking on Luis in battle and bearing the weight of the crown. Rella also pulls back the curtain on the church and tells the people that Forden and the church were behind the prince's assassination attempt, and that we are the true prince as shown by our power. With the church's foundations torn apart and the people firmly behind us, Rella reveals that her transgressions also has placed the curse on herself, and she must finally die, and we must carry on forward for her as she encases herself in an icy tomb. And at long last, the curse is finally broken, and Juna is devastated. The pacing does unfortunately take a bit of a dip in between Rella and the final battle with Luis on the 24th of September, but not before the Senate seeks to cover their own asses and you are given ample time to prepare for what will no doubt be a marathon of a duel with Luis. This was done in mind for you to tighten up your follower length and to learn any archetypes so that you can give yourself the most options possible for the crescendo of the main story arc. Things then shift to Zorba and Luis as the former is finally found where the prince has been hidden all this time, and where things really begin to get blown open, narratively speaking. Luis seemed to know of this village the whole time and was merely playing cat and mouse with us. He also knew Forden had targeted the village as to not leave an heir to the throne, but to kill the illegitimate son. As he sends Zorba to kill the prince, he takes one look at the book that we also have and mentions a particular spell. But what this means, we can only guess, but it's certain to involve a human. And finally, our confrontation is at hand with Luis, the battle to stake out claim against his agenda and for the people of Euchronia. Luis to this point is unquestionably your toughest battle, with the ability to change weaknesses and to gain word turns as well as having immense physical attacks. After a thrilling battle, we come to learn that the Elda are a descendant of humankind. While no one believes him, he turns the protagonist into an abomination of a human through his own magic and through fear, influences the public opinion to once again shift towards him, even though we had just beaten him in a battle. In our dire straits, we flee to the Elden Sanctum to recuperate. It is a shadow of what it used to be, and the aura of death is everywhere. Russell, one of the senior members of the Resistance, lays on us that the prince is also dead, and no one was strong enough to stop the attack from the attacker. While all seems lost now, and the primary mission failed, we get a juicy lore drop that the prince's mother was the queen of the Elda tribe, and they actually hated the king. Yet another well-executed twist by Atlus was to reveal that you are an avatar, if you will, of the prince, and were created basically to live a life that he himself could not live, but on the chosen day, will return to the sanctum and merge with the prince to become one. In short, you're the prince's extracted soul, just in another form. All the trials, setback, and victories were not all for nothing, and his desires to change the world resonate within us. After the initial shock has worn off from the party members, we get even more heavy narrative laid on us in regards to the Elda and about Luis. The Elda themselves were all one people and not split into tribes like they are now. Everyone was humankind. Or, in defining who was right and wrong, led to the fall of the old civilization. Humanity was torn apart by fear and anxiety. Humans, as we fought them, are remnants of the past who have fallen to Magla and are effectively monsters and live out their lives horribly. The church even used igniters to limit people's magic to avoid history repeating itself. And we also awakened to the ultimate archetype, the prince. But that's not all. We finally found out about Luis's past. He's from an Elda family called Chiradrius. His family died in the fires, and there were families of doctors. This, of course, no doubt radicalized him, and he seems to have the ultimate end goal to turn everyone into humans. So, he's in fact an Elda, just as you are, but taking a far different path in life. Luis, now aware of what has happened, seeks an audience with the king. He is beyond the talk about the support of the people to get the scepter, and instead, he knows the true secrets behind his magic. The king is powerless to stop him and can only watch as Luis harnesses the power of the scepter and dares us to defeat him once and for all. The people of the kingdom are gripped by his spell and overcome with anxiety. And as we cross over into the final leg of the story, Luis is waiting for us, lamenting on how the king had failed, and how all of the people's anxieties is giving him even more strength to finish what the king had started with his own personal touch. as we are now on the skybound avatar in this final dungeon, which was no cakewalk. A series of mazes, mini-bosses, and one of the more challenging Atlus puzzles I can remember in recent memory. It certainly took my playtime hours up quite a bit, as I racked my brain trying to figure out one of these puzzles. After each mini-boss defeat, the spell would be weakened as you broke something like an infused statue to cure the populace of their madness. Further pushing you up into number 2, you also see visions of the king as he laments the losses of his wife and child, and you see how things come to be in the early part of the story, with the Mage's Academy as well. It is truly sad to see how far the king has fallen. Even returning to the room where it all began with the prince's assassination attempt brings back a familiar enemy for round 2, Zorba. Only this time he's gotten some upgrades. He can use Heat Riser and also gains turns as well, and uses moves like Giant Scythe and Sorrow Curse. Needless to say, he packs a nasty punch and can also shield himself to reduce physical attacks. Personally, I really enjoyed his second battle, and I thought narratively it sets you up for what is ahead and gives you perspective on just what Melancholia can do to a person with Luis casting spells. As Zorba realizes it's the end of the line, he once again falls to his death, but this time for good. The path ahead is certain. We have to get to Luis and stop him before everyone gets mutilated by Melancholia. The people finally start to wake up after seeing Zorba's curse and realize that Luis isn't going to help them and will discard them just as he did with Zorba. With the Senate and the people behind you, you can really feel the momentum shift as you face some unthinkable horrors ahead. At long last, we finally confront Luis, his Elden self present for all to see. He lets us in on how with the public's favor, he was able to obtain the scepter, and with that scepter, he has near unlimited power as it draws on the people's fears and anxieties. As this has been ongoing for centuries, the people use the king as a conduit for their fears to keep people from going mad. And as the king's magic fades, the new magic will wash over the people, and those who survive will live, and those who die do not have a place in this new world to begin with. While this is viewed by Luis as natural selection, it is no doubt unhinged, and countless will die. Predictably, he offers you a chance to join him, which we obviously decline. He certainly enjoys the opportunity for one final battle from the star above, and with everything at stake, we cannot afford to lose. Even the king himself is with us, but all he can do is watch his son and hope that he's up to the task. Once reaching the Tyrant star, jump in enemy difficulty is the first thing that you'll notice, and if you hadn't prepared accordingly for this true endgame dungeon, then there is only yourself to blame. After fighting through the gauntlet of enemies, you also have the optional task of taking out some of his human sub-bosses, which makes the final battle with Luis just a little bit easier, which I do highly recommend you doing unless you want an even longer final battle. Plus, you're given some great endgame weapons for your troubles. Okay, so now you've made it to Luis for the final time. He also finally tells us what was the spark that set his internal flame of hatred and retribution onto the lands. While the king gave him hope for a brighter future and a life of freedom he always wanted, the church tore that from him as he watched his friends die before him, forged him into the person he is today, and he would not allow such things to ever happen again with the scepter in his hands. As he transforms into the archdemon, expect to see some high-level elemental attacks and a multi-target physical attack, as well as a charge-up move you need to break before he nearly wipes the party, provided you're leveled high enough. After enough of a beating, he then transforms into Phase 2. Remember, this is an Atlus final boss after all, so this is going to be a marathon. After another attempt to drop a monologue on you, ending in rejection, Luis one-shots you and you're saved by more. This section was a welcome addition to what Atlus has traditionally done in final battles, and Moore himself tries to get us to buy into his utopia, but we ultimately reject him too, since this is really not a real place, and he reveals himself to be another version of Athlodius, and we have to battle him to break free, and once Moore is defeated, he comes to accept the loss of his wife and child after all. And all this was part of a bigger picture set in motion by the king, who was playing some 4D chess the whole time, and honestly, this was a twist that I was not expecting. As you are sent back to battle Luis in Phase 2, it offers another gimmick which added an element of strategy to the battle. There are 3 different masks: joy, ire, and mirth. Another cool element is that he has infused himself with his gauntlet runner, so he looks even more menacing. Luis will begin with a move called the Cold World, which maximizes the chance of anxiety being inflicted in the battle, and the other major thing to keep in mind here is that you'll likely want at least one character focused on support and healing. Juna makes a great choice because she'll also spend some time creating weaknesses for each of the heads. His new ultimate big move is called New Dawn Sacrifice, an attack that sees him charge up for a turn by eating people. Make sure that you've created some weaknesses and hit the crap out of them, and then knock him out of his charge and stop him. As much as that sucked, there's still one phase left. Try to hide your shock, I know. No, he has fully succumbed to the madness and his face is cracked and become a human. Just simply use what you did before and Luis does have a bonus attack this time around called High Pressure, which can trigger anxiety in any member of the party. If he's used the Cold World, it has an even higher chance of working. Once you finally get him to a certain point, the King's archetype is then unleashed, and you vaporize his ass in a move that is absolutely pure cinema. At last, the devil that is Luis has finally been defeated, and a new dawn breaks. It is said what had happened to the king, but his choices were justified in the end, and that people will have the support of a new king who will usher in a new age of hope and prosperity. Seeing all of your friends who went through hell and back with you during the coronation ceremony was a particularly touching moment that really drove home the feeling of, you did it, great job. You have created a nation where fantasy and dreams are always within reach, and long have we waited for this day. Onward, fearless, into a world unknown. Fantasy lives on. Now that we've discussed the story at length, let's pivot to another great aspect of the game, combat and level design. One of the best things about Metaphor is the archetype system and its use in combat. Archetypes themselves signify spirits of the kings and queens of old. You work with more, similar to Igor of the Persona series, to cultivate these archetypes, and you can inherit skills from other types to build a formidable and versatile archetype, or you can continue to build each class's skill tree to create better origin archetypes, like for example the Mage to Warlock class, which is one I used extensively in my playthrough. Overall, there are 14 types to unlock, and some classes can have 2 or 3 upgrades to build to. You can also use mag that you've gained throughout your playthrough to buy new classes, provided your follower links have been met. Another element to be considered during combat with archetypes is the synthesis system, which is basically when 2 archetypes do a joint attack together that resonate with each other, which adds yet another element to making the combat more enjoyable. As you get to the later game, you can create royal archetypes, which are some of the best and most powerful available with some extremely powerful skills. There are 6 in total, and while you don't have to get them, it would certainly benefit you to do so if you want to have an easier time in the game. I felt like this whole system was a callback to the job system in Final Fantasy V, but with its own unique flavor. Regarding the base combat itself, it is a press turn system akin to the Shin Megami Tensei games we have all come to love. Attacking at weakness grants more turns and builds from there, but that isn't the innovative part of this. They've incorporated action-based combat and dungeon exploration to help ease the monotony that we've all felt at some point during an Atlus game. That is nothing to be ashamed of, rather they had our best interests in mind and allowed us to speed things up and not waste time fighting lower level enemies for no reason. It definitely served as a way to cut down overall play hours if you're properly leveled before going into a dungeon. This is something that must be considered for all future Persona and SMT games as well. Now, to this point I have been overwhelmingly positive, but this is where I am disappointed things weren't better, and that was the level design. Short of the main story, which the dungeons themselves all had the same feel for the most part, the side missions were most definitely something that they had to have rushed on and were unquestionably boring, but I forced myself through them to get more XP and money. I question if they tried to play it safe since it was a new IP, but even then, it wouldn't really make sense with the other risks that they took. Not to mention, just having some puzzles be levers or crawl spaces didn't really do much for me, but to that end, I wasn't really expecting something totally original, never having been done in a JRPG before. Again, this is a really small nitpick but needs to be mentioned. Something to build on for whatever they do next with this franchise, or even Persona or SMT games. Regarding a future sequel for Metaphor, Hashino has come out and said that they have no plans at this time to make a sequel. Do I believe this? Absolutely not. This game sold well over 1 million copies to date with no signs of stopping anytime soon. They would be missing out on a totally new cash cow for them, and as myself and many others loved what this game brought to the table. At the very minimum, I'm thinking that there'll be a re-release, as Atlus are known to do that. They could tie in some smaller characters that really didn't have much to do with the story, and have some missions based around that. I also think that Sega will be pushing Hashino to make sequels as long as he can. Given current game development timelines, I'm not hopeful of anything short of a 5-year turnaround with that, provided nothing crazy happens. I personally can't wait to see what the future holds for Metaphor, and I hope that you guys feel the same. Metaphor Refantazio was a shot in the arm I'd been hoping Atlus would give us. To be perfectly honest, I was starting to get worn out from Persona, as much as I enjoy it, and they took a huge risk going on the medieval dark fantasy, and they nailed it in just about every way possible. From something simple like making follower links more enjoyable and easier to build and max out, to having traits that you need to level up to trigger different interactions with characters, even going as far as to having a truly mature base storyline, with characters that have a vested interest every step of the way, and ones that you can really say that you're drawn to and support wholeheartedly. Luis is one of the best villains that they have made at minimum since Persona 5 Royal, and I'd go insofar as to say that it's the best game that they've made since Digital Devil Saga. Not to mention, Meguro made one of the best soundtracks he's ever done, and that's really saying something. It had its own uniqueness right from the start, and every song felt so fitting and majestic. Hats off to you, Meguro. This is by no means a perfect game, nothing ever is, and while I think it could have been even a little shorter with the endgame pacing being borderline awful, it never killed my overall enjoyment to the point of hating it. They can really continue to use this new world that they built for some amazing things, should they so choose, and I do hope that they incorporate the combat mechanics into already established games like Persona, and add a bit of innovation to that franchise as well, since doing a one and done with this type of game seems wasteful, given the monumental amount of effort this game took. With all that said, I hope that you've enjoyed this video, and remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one. Star Soldier 17, out.